So I'm Karrie Westwood. I own Meadowsweet Herbs. My lavender farm's in the 6 Mile Houston area, and in my former life I was a nurse. That's kind of what prompted me to get into herbs and other things, is because in the nursing profession there's and I don't say this lightly, but modern medicine does not take care of it. Very rarely cures or even fully makes you better. I thought I knew how to grow in cold areas. I'd been in Coeur d'Alene, which is a softer climate than here, but I'd lived here for 15 plus years. I lived in Phillipsburg, Montana for 3 years. I was growing roses and tomatoes and all those kind of things. I thought, how hard could lavender be? And my first year was in 2008, and I planted all this. I went to Karrie and got all kinds of plants and did a 3-tiered hillside. You know, I got it all ready. It was beautiful. Planted all my plants, and then October, I think it was October 9th or 10th, we had a below zero freeze. No snow, nothing. I lost 90% at least of all of the plants that I had planted that year. And that was my first big setback. And as you know, here you can get anything. I lived in Phillipsburg, we'd go to the 4th of July in Butte and it would snow on us. So I had to kind of rethink the way my property sits. We have about 11.5 acres. And the way our property sits, we don't even get sun from Thanksgiving till the end of February. No sun. So in the summertime we get really nice we're west facing, and then we have a little hill that wraps around us that makes sure that in the wintertime we don't get any sun. So it's been an interesting challenge, but that has also been my friend, because the snow stays on my plants a month or two longer. So it helps me a lot. I also discovered that I can't plant in the fall, especially lavender. It needs time to set its root. It needs to be deep enough that when it hits 20 below, it doesn't freeze down to the tip. One year we did have kind of a late frost. I think it was early June, had a pretty deep frost, and I was like, oh, I don't think they're gonna make it. My mom kept saying, just wait, and sure enough, it came completely from the root. I had to cut back all the lavender and it came completely from the root. So it was almost September before I was able to harvest because it was so long. So I am pleased to see everybody here, and thank you for coming and joining me. For those of you guys that just walked in, I'm Karrie Westwood. I own Meadowsweet Herbs. I own the 6 Mile Lavender Farm and the Gaiwan Tea House in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I've got my big still going right now. This is a distillation I did a couple days ago. And this is the oil. This is the Hydrosol. So every bit of oil you can get is precious. Lavender is pretty prolific. I don't know of anything I've ever distilled that is more prolific than the lavender. Hence, I've started co-distilling. So what we're doing today is a cedar and a lavender co-distillation. Many of the plants and essential oils that you get, like roses, I think it takes 1,000 rose petals to make an ounce or less. So if you can imagine what 1,000 rose petals would look like. I usually get it out of my big still. If I'm distilling completely with lavender, I'll get almost a full ounce. In the bottom of that is my chipped cedar. And I'll tell you about my cedar. In the 6 Mile, there's a couple of really nice cedar groves. And we go up there, you know, it's a beautiful place to hang out. And there's some hiking trails and stuff. And I go up after a big windstorm and see what's blown down. I won't ever harvest a live tree unless it's just newly fallen. So in July this summer, I had a distillation class at my farm, and we were co-distilling, so we went up to the cedar grove to gather just the cedar fronds like you can see down in front there. And I noticed this beautiful tree that had fallen over and had gotten caught up in some other trees.
Probably poke a hole.
Yeah, it'll eventually come. So I was like, wow, that would be a great tree to get in a couple months. So about September, I went back up there with my husband and the chainsaw, and we were able to gather the cedar, and we took, it was a good sized tree, probably about 16-inch diameter, diameter, not circumference. And then my neighbor is an arborist.
Are you putting all the water in there?
Not all of it, but close to it. Yeah. He's. I don't think there's a cap to take off. I'm not going to just. I don't. I don't want it all over my car if I don't use the whole thing. So it's okay because then I can talk and squeeze. So the thing to do when you're wildcrafting, and probably most of you know this, is to be really conscious of the plants. Don't over harvest. I'd never take a live tree because I want those cedars to stay up there as long as possible. But this one was windblown. It was over the creek. It was caught up in a tree so that it was a prime deal, because before I've gotten the cedar and it's been no, it's not. I've gotten the cedar and it's been kind of old and dry, and this was pretty fresh. Let's see.
How particular are you about the water you use?
I needed a little extra pull. There we go. I'm very particular. We have a really nice aquifer up where we live with, and I've had the water tested. You don't want to, I wouldn't use Missoula water. It's got a little too much chlorine in it. I think this company and one other company are considered pretty premier water companies. The other thing to note is you don't want distilled water. You want the minerals in the water.
Is hard water an issue with your equipment?
I've had this. I've had this still for 10 years, and I've always used our well water and have had no problem. So now I want you guys to take a look. That's about how high I'm filling it. The cedar wood seems to suck up a lot of water. So if I'm not careful, if I don't get enough water, it will burn on the bottom, which is the one thing you don't want to happen. This still is almost 10 years old. This one is, I just bought this year.
So there's cedar chips under the steam?
Nope,
Oh,
nope,
you haven't done that.
nope, I haven't put the cedar chips in yet. So that's why I want everybody to join me. And I have an outside distillation area, so I'm used to being messy and nobody cares kind of thing. All of the chips I use in my garden, and so it works out really well. The distilled cedar, when it's done, not cedar, lavender, when it's done, we use either in our compost or we burn it. We're in an area where we can still have a wood stove. So it's got that steamer in the bottom to keep the particles from hanging out on the bottom and burning. Now we're ready for the, here we go. Next. So I'm going to let everybody throw in their cedar. So I'm putting the hardiest, sometimes I'll do a distillation with my lavender where I cut off the stems and put them in the bottom and then put the buds in the top. With this co-distillation, the wood goes in, I'm putting it in the bottom because the water getting in there and heating and is going to release more. So everybody gets to put in their branch or two.
So do you always do the wood chips in the bottom, or would?
If I'm doing just a straight lavender distillation, no.
Oh.
This is a co-distillation with cedar, so yes.
No, but like, would you just pack in all the stems and branches and leaves?
I can do that if I don't have a tree. I got lucky.
Oh, okay.
So
but those wood chips have a lot of oil in them?
They don't.
Oh, okay.
I have, and it's something I'm exploring because I just got this tree just like a month ago, and I distilled just the chips just to see it, and I got no oil at all. I got a nice hydrosol, but no oil. The branches and leaves have more oil, so when I distill just a full still with just the leaves, I will probably get a quarter of what I get with a full lavender distillation. So I'll get, as opposed to a full ounce in this still, I'll probably get a quarter of an ounce, like 12 mils maybe, or less, 10 mils. Yeah, so that's the nice thing about coat. So I'm going to let you guys join in, toss a few things. Just be aware that that's hot over there. The co-distillation is what I'm exploring this year. I did a lot of different herbs, and we'll get to smell all those. I did basil, I did yarrow, I did melissa, I did, oh, I'm gonna just, oh, it's okay. I just was thinking, oh, I didn't do that yet, but I don't have water in there. Usually this is hooked into a hose that's hooked into a special valve I have in my herb kitchen, so I can regulate the water. But because I'm not in my herb kitchen, it's got sky hook instead. And I'm gonna just, so the water I'm pouring into the pan here, it's not critical as far as the process of wanting really clean water. So I am using a little bit of Missoula water for that. If you have access to a wonderful spring water, that's another place.
So is it mainly poison that you look to avoid?
Well, I've been poisoned with arsenic, so I don't want arsenic in my lavender either, in my lavender oil. And that's just a whole nother side story, but the water where I lived in Coeur d'Alene has arsenic in it. And that's a whole nother story, but something you have to be aware of, and that's, I had my water tested specifically because of being poisoned. It wasn't a very pleasant experience. Can I get the bucket of lavender now? As you can imagine.
For making products like this, are there any certifications that you need to have or that you've chosen to have for?
I have done through, there's a company called Floricopia out of, what's the name of that little town up there in California, up in the Sierras? Sierraville, I think. Is that, it's up there near Lake Tahoe and over the next ridge or so. So I've done some work with them. I've done some work with the Maui Aromatherapy Institute in Maui. And so those two, and then you can get aromatherapy certifications. There are people who do, for me it's been kind of figure out your own thing, just because it seems like for instance, when I was planting my lavender, I got a lot of really good information from people who grew around here. And I wouldn't say it strictly does not apply to me, but I had to discover how my land worked and how the plants worked with me and the land. And like I explained earlier, just the way the climate is, I have a little microclimate. It's different than Missoula. So I got some not so good information, and not because they were trying to trick me or anything, it's just that they didn't understand my situation. So what I found recently is I'm using very dry lavender, and since I started working with the dried lavender, I get a lot of, I call it purple lung. So I'm gearing up here, And you guys are welcome to come forward. It's just that I have so much exposure. It's not going to hurt you or kill you. It's just that, you know, the more you do something, I wanted to be able to talk through the workshop.
Is it better to use like dry versus fresh lavender, or?
Well, I used to think it was better to use fresh. There's a couple reasons. I would use fresh. Mainly, your growing season is so short with lavender. You've only got about 2.5 to 3 weeks of lavender production. So if you have a good sized lavender farm, that's a lot of work to get done in that, and two businesses besides. So, so I'm going to let you guys stuff this with the lavender. And I'm going to take that off. I also fill this top part. So if one of you want to start shoving it in there. So this is starting to heat up, and usually I have a thermometer here. I think that thermometer got lost on the way. It's probably in my in my car someplace. It's important to keep your water here cool. And like I said, at home I have a special nozzle that if you want to wear the gloves too, you're welcome to, because sometimes I'll get sliver from the dry stuff. So when I'm doing this, I will use ice to insulate and to keep that water cool. So, because as you can see, it's starting to steam pretty good. So.
Is there any certifications or like regulatory stuff on distilling and then selling it?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
I'm not avoiding your question, but I was just so excited when I saw that it was happening. So DoTERRA ran into some issues because they were recommending people take it orally, and people were getting a little carried away with diagnosing and telling people what to do with the oil medically.
That's what I was just wondering about.
You have to be
certain essential oils some people would take them internally.
Well, I take essential oils internally.
Yeah.
But I don't tell you to.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And because then I'd be practicing without a license.
Yeah.
And I do have my nursing license, but I'm not a doctor. The way I got started with lavender and essential oils is I was a psych nurse for 20 years in an adolescent unit with children, and 2 to 16 years old, 17 years old. And I got introduced to lavender. So every time the ice cubes all melt, if you put a few more in and just kind of keep that cooled off. So I started working with lavender with the kids, and I'd give them a couple drops on their pillows. I would call my doctors that I worked for and say, hey, I need an order to give this kid a couple drops of lavender on their pillow so they can sleep. So they started writing orders for lavender. And then one day they said, hey, Karrie, why don't you just do a standing order? We'll sign it. You have license to give lavender to any of these kids. So that's kind of how I got started, in addition to just herbs in general, but with the lavender. And it was really helpful for sleeping. As you can imagine, being in a psychiatric situation is really high stress for a teenager or a child, being away from their family and or their gang, whichever may be the case. But so that's how I got started using lavender. And so if you're working with other people, there are aromatherapy certifications you can do, the courses. They aren't recognized by the state so you have to be really careful. I tell people, unless I'm treating my digestive system, I probably would never ingest it. And the reason being is your skin is your biggest organ, and your skin will get that essential oil into your bloodstream faster than almost anything, except putting it under your tongue and letting it go in sublingual. The other thing is, if you're smelling it, you're going to be getting it that way. You're going to getting a nice right to the brain. There goes that purple lung. My last choice is orally, because if you think about your digestive system, and if you're wanting to treat your big toe and you take a pill orally, and it has to go all the way down through your blood system and end up at your big toe, I'd just rather rub it on my big toe. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sure eventually, and I think there are some like alternative colleges that are, you know, probably naturopathic colleges, and somebody's sending me messages and it'll keep beeping till I hit it. There we go. But there are a few colleges, I think, that offer those kinds of things. The biggest problem with treating people and essential oils, you have to say to the person, I am not a doctor. I am happy to tell you what I would do for myself. I'm happy to tell you what I do for my family and close friends. But when you start saying, this is what you need to do, then you get into trouble. So you just have to be careful, just like with herbs and any other alternative, unless you're a licensed physician. The AMA and the drug companies want to come down on you.
Karrie, how many different things do you distill?
Well, lavender is my main thing. I live up in the mountains, so I have a lot of yarrow. I have, for certain things take off in certain places, I have a huge patch of Melissa. It doesn't produce much oil, but it's lovely hydrosol. I'm growing more and more herbs that I'm going to start.
Like mint or different?
Mint, I've done mint, and that's something I have never planted a lot of. My soil is clay and rocks. And so we can all go back in and relax now. Just take it easy, get out of the sun. We'll let these guys do their work. And she sent me this directions on how to build a labyrinth with your lavender. And I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. Maybe that would help. So it took me 2 years, because we live out in the middle of pastures and grassland. The first year was covering it with black plastic to kill the grass and make sure that the roots were killed and all of that. Then I waited for the sunrise on spring equinox, so I could have a due east from my property, so that would be the entrance to the labyrinth. And then I proceeded to put down garden cloth, again, because of one of the things that had been a problem was all the grass that we had that just keeps growing no matter what you do. I built the labyrinth and my lavender took off. I now have at least 500 plants, probably closer to 600, because I planted quite a few this year. Obviously, if you have a partner that'll hang out with you and do that. There's a lot of different ways to muscle test. Some people just do it with rubbing their fingernail. Yes is smooth, no is rough. That one I haven't quite fully accomplished. Some people stand, like I own Meadowsweet Herbs, so I'll have people stand with an herb. If you lean into the herb, it's yes. If you move away from it, it's no. So it's a simple way to test things. Does your body really want this? So when you're communicating with the plants, and this is my favorite way. My little finger and my thumb on my left non-dominant hand, And then with my right hand, I press out. So yes is strong, no is weak. So it's going to open up. So that's how I usually test something. Ooh. I'm not real precise. That isn't something I've studied a lot. I've read a few books. It's just what I have found works for me. Like I said, the first 3 years I wasn't getting much in the way of lavender. And when I started learning about plant medicine and talking to your plants and communicating with them, that's when my lavender started to grow and do well. Any questions about that at all? Does that seem, yeah?
So your labyrinth must look different than how your plants were laid out before.
Yeah, well, before I just kind of pell-mell planted here, straight lines. And most of the lavender farms you go to, they're just in these big, long rows. Whereas the labyrinth, as you can imagine, and I have a picture of myself standing in my lavender field, so you're welcome to pass that around. So, just to give proof that I actually grow this stuff. How am I doing on time? 2:40. What, aren't I done at 3 though? No, 3:30. Yes. Okay. So we are done here. I'm just gonna turn this so I don't overflow it, because it's so easy to do. You can see the slick of oil on the top and the hydrosol. The hydrosol is really a wonderful product that you get. You get a lot of it though. So that's the biggest challenge, is finding ways to use it. The hydrosol can be used, I put it in a mister and take it with me when I travel. I mist my sheets, I mist all of my whatevers, because lavender has a lot of antimicrobial properties, and it's going to kill any friendly bugs.
Is the hydrosol, like, it's water and just elements of the herb? Or?
Well, it's from the steam. The steam comes out and it takes the oil molecules with it. But this is the oil you get. And then the rest is the hydrosol. So it has some of the same elements as the oil, but not quite as strong. In fact, a lot less. So a lot of people drink the hydrosols for various reasons, and because it's milder, and again, I'm not telling you to do that, I'm just saying some people do that. I have a guy that comes into Meadowsweet and buys, I think he buys the rose hydrosol, and he drinks it. But I didn't tell him to do that. He just came in and said he was doing that. So I said, that's cool.
Oil on the top there?
Yep, that's the oil on the top. You can see it. I have a tea house, so I have syrups, and I have a lot of glass bottles from that. I'll leave the hydrosol and the oil for about a day, because there's a lot of oil in that hydrosol that I want to get to the top. So if I am... And there are, and I can't remember what they're called. It's a thing that you can attach here, and it has a spiral inside, and it'll separate your oil from your hydrosol. They're real expensive, they're made of glass, and they break. So I've kind of just quit bothering with that, because it gets expensive. I do have a special bulb, and again, it's glass, so I didn't bring it. I didn't want to break it in transport. It's a kind of a teardrop shape and then comes down, narrows down. And I pour my hydrosols through there to get the last bit of oil, because your oil will stick to the top, so I'll just keep pouring the gallons of hydrosol through there until I get enough oil. This is kind of old-fashioned. The cedar oil must have come back to me. There we go. Okay. So these are all cedar and lavender co-distillation. So I just take a little pipette and take the oil off. So that's how I do it. Not real technically savvy, but it works, and I get an immediate knowledge of how much oil I got that off of that particular one. So I've got a little bit of plant matter in there, and that's okay, that happens. This is how I cut my lavender. It's I looked up the name because I couldn't remember what it was, and it was like Zen knife or something. It's got the serration on the inside, so I grab the lavender on the plant and then cut across that way. I've tried doing it with scissors. One of the lavender farms I went to in Hood River gave you scissors. That made the experience last a whole lot longer because I was, cutting a bundle of lavender takes a while. This is one of the things I'm working on. One is co-distillations, and one is working with other lavender farmers. And this is one of the gals that I work with. This is her dried lavender. And let me see if I've got a little bit left. You guys remember, oh, here we go. So this is the same thing dried. So you guys asked me, is it better to use it fresh or dried? I experimented with that. I get a little bit less when it's been dried a long time. But this particular is from her farm. She has 2,000 plants. I only have 500, so mine goes pretty early in the season. She gives me the tailings of her lavender crop. Her name is Marilyn Morris, and she's down the Bitterroot. And so she gets, the tail end of her crop looks that brownie colored. If you hang your lavender upside down, it'll retain the color and keep it in a fairly dark place. When my lavender first starts to bloom, I bring it into the store, I cut it and bring it in bundles and hang it from the ceiling. It's kind of a, celebration, it notifies everybody the lavender's coming in. And so that's kind of the best way to do it. The darker the better, but Meadowsweet isn't a totally shuttered store, so it probably loses a little bit of color. Some people have drying sheds where they'll have a whole wall, like a fence that they hang the lavender on, and then it's enclosed in a dark room, so it retains most of the color. And I think that's what Marilyn has. I haven't been to her farm, but I have five different people that I work with that bring me their lavender. A lot of you have heard of Lavender Lori. She was out in the Rattlesnake, and now she's up in St. Regis, and I think St. Ignatius, thank you. I always confuse those two. And she donated a dozen bundles this year. Marilyn probably didn't donate because I paid her, 6 carloads, completely full back end of our SUVs, maybe even more. And because it's the tail end of her lavender, I'm not giving her premium price. It's stuff she can't sell anyway, so we work out a deal. I get the tailings, and she gets a little bit of extra money from her lavender crop. A friend of mine that lives up, Mimi Werner, does Lava Jazz pottery. She said, oh, take all my old lavender. So I scooped up, she had half a dozen plants, so I scooped up her lavender. My cousin-in-law down in Hamilton also grows. She distills her own lavender. So she brings me fully distilled lavender to put into the Montana blend. So I'm gonna just check this real quick. Oh, the thermometer. This, for some reason, it's really interesting. This still, and I don't know if it's because it's new or we haven't got to know each other very well yet, but it takes a lot longer than the bigger still does to heat up. Because I own the tea house over in Coeur d'Alene, I found some different friends around the Coeur d'Alene area that grow lavender. So this is my Idaho blend. So, and it's 4 different farms, or 5, I guess. I'm gonna find that.
Do you use use all the same kind of lavender?
No, I do not. I'm into diversity.
So you're using French and English and
Munstead, Hydecoat, and Grosso. Imperial, Fulgate is what this one is. I brought some different lavender bundles because I wanted you to see the difference in the heads of lavender. Your Grosso lavenders will give you more oil. That's this one.
What's it called?
Grosso.
This one is?
No, the other one. This one's a Munstead. Hydecoat will hardly give you anything, but it's very nice culinary lavender. And it's not very prolific, so you can see the difference in how this is the French lavender, the Grosso. This is the English. They consider the English lavender a little more that you can use in cooking, gourmet. What's the word I want? Culinary. Thank you. So, but you can see the different lavenders. I have many different plants where whenever I go out of town, anywhere, Europe, whatever, I'll smuggle lavender plants back with me and plant them. I have found that at my house, I can't get the super hybrids like the whites and the really light pinks to last more than a season. I've never been able to get them to grow a second season. Spanish lavender, I almost don't consider it even lavender just because I don't know if any of you know what it looks like. But it's a very odd little plant and has these big bulbous lavender. And I don't know if they even distill it or if they just, and it definitely won't make it through a winter here. There's some pretty ones too, like this one has kind of a lacy leaf. But that you get anything that's grown prolifically on the Mediterranean, you're not going to get in Montana. It just doesn't quite make it. I also do flower essences, and I try to do them with a full moon, a super moon, a blue moon, we didn't get to see the lunar eclipse here. There was a full lunar eclipse in August. I did do a flower essence that day. So you get the energies of that. Last summer we did the full moon, blue moon in August. Judith Polarand, who owns Alaska Essence, came to my farm and did a workshop with us on doing flower essences. And so I do a blend of essences with my Hydrosol, some essential oil, and it just makes this, I call it the goddess mist because it makes this lovely scent. I just realized that instead of putting it in a spray bottle, I put it in a pump. I was going to pass that around for you guys to, so it's a little rougher. You can you can mist it on yourself. Instead of being a nice mist, it's kind of so one of the things that I was talking about was that most other plants don't give you a prolific amount of oil. Mint is pretty good just because it's so abundant. But if I fill my still with mint, I probably will get 5 mils as opposed to a full ounce that I'll get with lavender. The other thing I did was this was the blood moon distillation. So I distilled at different times. Full moon, you're supposed to get more. I found that I get less. So this is lavender and thyme. And if you guys got to smell the lavender and cedar, this is rosemary, thyme, and lavender.
How do you do it?
That's another workshop. Sorry. You'll have to watch my Facebook page and see when I'm doing a flower essence. This was a new moon, and I found I got more. And anybody in the essential oil business will tell you get more during the full moon. Because my lavender farm is oppositional and defiant. Melissa or lemon balm if you get the oil off of it, it sells for around $1,000 an ounce. Lavender is anywhere from $50 to $100 an ounce, just depending on the situation and who's doing it. So rose is about $1,000 an ounce, and I'm averaging. I'm not real accurate. Putting the Melissa with the lavender, I get a lot more oil. I get that essence of what the Melissa's going to do for me. Melissa's a super healer. It has a lot of skin healing properties. It's also emotionally healing. It's really a lovely oil, but you know, it's really expensive. So this one coming around is a lemon geranium. My rose geraniums, for some reason, the last couple years have not done so well. But rose geranium is what you get geranium oil from, and it's really a nice oil. And it probably, if I could grow a whole hillside of rose geranium, I'd get a lot of oil from it. But because I'm limited by my greenhouse space, I like to co-distill it with lavender. Rose geranium is really a nice skin and also a hormone balancer. So you're welcome to sniff all of these again. The main reason I'm doing my co-distillations is because I want to have the elements of those other herbs, the other essential oils. Like thyme is really good for fungus and like some kind of skin disease, rash, that kind of stuff. So you combine it with the lavender, which is really a good, also a good skin. But this is my first year doing a lot of different co-distillations, so it's still in the experimental stage. One of the things I'm really interested in doing is, like I said, I have my Montana blend. And this spring I was with, my husband and I were up on Flathead Lake, and we had gone into the Mission Mountain Winery. And we were chatting, and I said, oh, I have a lavender farm. And she said, oh, I've been wanting to grow some lavender out here. Most of our grapes haven't done so well. We get most of our grapes from other places like Washington and Oregon and California. And she said, but I thought it would be fun to have lavender, and it would look pretty and all of that. And I said, great. Well, why don't you grow it, and I'll bring my still, and we'll have a lavender festival. And she thought that was a great idea. So it got me thinking that it would be a wonderful thing to have kind of your backup crop be lavender. The deer don't like it. The grasshoppers don't eat it. The squirrels and chipmunks have not gone after it yet.
Wolves don't like it?
I don't think so. I don't think so. One time I planted a ton of garlic and different bulb things, and I'm pretty sure the voles and they loved it because I had nothing come up that next fall or that next spring. But lavender is amazing. It's the first year I love to grow things, and that first year what the deer didn't destroy, the frost didn't get, it was just, and then the next year I got a fence, and then the locusts came. And they pretty much ate the leaves off of every tree, So it was like I was really feeling, and then I was trying to grow garlic, and I couldn't even grow garlic. I was like, wow. But the lavender and a lot of the herbs the deer and other animals don't eat. And that's one of the nice things about growing lavender and herbs is I don't get the deer. My elecampane, the deer wait, and even my echinacea, which is supposed to be deer resistant, as soon as they bloom, the deer come in and take care of them. Now I've got a little buck that's living up above us, and he's decided to eat all my pear trees, so he'll knock down the fences. So it's always a challenge in the woods. But if you're interested in growing lavender in Montana and you want to join me in producing oil. I went to the co-op talk because I wanted to find out how to go about doing something like that. I don't know if that is going to be what I do, but I love distilling, and my lavender shows up end of July to middle of August. Most places it shows up end of June to middle of July. So I have kind of a late season, and so I've been distilling Maryland's lavender and mine, and it's just been going. I started in the 1st of July in Idaho distilling, and then moved into my season. I'm still got lavender to distill because of Maryland's dried lavender. So, yeah.
So how many bottles do you get from one, I guess, batch? Do you call it batch?
Yeah, so with the a full distillation of lavender, I'll get about 1 ounce of lavender oil.
Oh,
it fills.
How many bottles? Yeah, how many bottles?
It fills the bottle.
Just one time.
I could get more. There would be no oil in it.
It would just be more hydrosol.
It would just be more hydrosol, and so unless I'm doing something like Melissa, where I want the hydrosol because there isn't much oil to be gotten out of it, I usually will stop because most of the oil will be in that first bottle. Well, it comes off together, but the oil floats to the top.
So if you were to fill a second bottle, though, that you
wouldn't get oil. You might get maybe a mil.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes I do, but I've got so much lavender hydrosol this year, I don't have any place to store it. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. So, but you can see this one has, and I think I'll go ahead and turn this off because I think we got as much as we can. And then I let it cool, sometimes overnight, just depending on how late I'm distilling. And then I'll take the end product, the stuff that's got all the oil taken out of it, and we use that for fire starter or just mulch it. The wood chips I use around in my garden as mulch around my lavender plants. That's the other thing, yeah.
How many distillations to get an ounce of oil?
If it's lavender, 1.
Is the oil in the flower or in the stalk?
It's in everything, yeah. Yeah, and
So you can use everything.
I use the stalks, yeah. And like I was saying at the beginning, if I am doing all lavender, I'll put the stalks in the bottom where it's more in contact with the hotter water, and then the flowers where there's more oil is in them, they'll go into the top barrel.
Can you overstuff it?
If you get it too tightly stuffed, I have found, and I think that's what was happening when I first got my new still, I was overstuffing it. It'll just not let that steam through as easily.
And that looks like?
And that just means you get low yield, and it takes you a lot longer. I'm still learning about this still.
And where do you get stills?
These both came from Portugal. I order them online. There's a company called Almade. So alchemy and made combined, ALMEADE.
Do you need a still to do this, or are there like homemade ways to extract oil?
Not any really good ways. I mean, people make homemade stills all the time. You can use, when I first got into it, this was one of my earlier stills. I also had glass flasks, like a chemist has, with the stoppers. So you heat the one, it would send the steam over to the second one that had the lavender in it, and then supposedly the steam would come out. I didn't get anything from it. There are a lot of different kinds of stills. There's stainless still, there's glass. Perfumers use glass stills, and they use very little water and really, like how we pack that tight, they'll use a really light, just kind of fluffy thing. And I don't know much about perfuming, but I've just seen them in pictures and stuff. So there's a you know, there's hundreds of different stills. Some of them are like moonshine stills that have been converted, and they'll have my neighbor has one. He was doing gin, and it's a 4-inch barrel, and it comes up off the top, and it goes, he had to build an extension on his garage. I mean, it's like 20 feet high. And we tried to convert it to do the lavender, and we got a gallon of Hydrosol with maybe 5 mils of oil. I wasn't there when he distilled it, so I'm not sure what happened, why it did that. It's kind of one of those things you just experiment with. So those small, I suspect that because it was a smaller diameter, that the steam cools off quickly because it goes up so high before it hits the gooseneck. So it's cooling before it even gets up there and falling back down. And in gin distillation, you want that, I guess. He was telling me there's some, you want it to recycle through, that it makes
With juniper berries?
yeah, makes better gin, but I've never done it. So I like my my copper still, and I think it has a better scent when I'm done. And you can't really see the oil. I try to run it up into here because then I get a nice head of oil on the top. This looks like I hardly got anything, but up here, that's probably about that much stuff. So having a tapering bottle is nice. This one was what we did today, so you can see once it goes up in that taper, it's going to be a lot more. A couple other products that I make from my lavender. I do a lot of workshops in the summertime. These are lavender wands. The lavender's inside. If you haven't seen a wand before, I heard a big sigh over here. They're kind of fun. You can kind of see the lavender head in that little one. This is the lavender basket. It's started the same way, and then you end it so that you're seeing the lavender. It's a fun thing to hang in the closet to keep the bugs away. Some properties of lavender, and then I do it like just wreaths. We made some wreath forms, and they make great flower headbands and things like that. This year, some friends of mine out in Oregon are doing candles, so I sent them an ounce of oil, and they sent me back some candles. So there's a lot of things you can do. I was just talking to Rebecca, who has Miriam's Skincare, about doing some soaps with my lavender. There's a lot of different products that you can make, and it's up to you and your imagination to figure that out. While you're meditating in your lavender field, you can discover. But yeah, one of my hopes and dreams is that I get more people growing lavender, because I think lavender is a healer. And I think there's also a deep connection between the human being and lavender. Not very many other animals like lavender. Obviously the deer don't eat it, the bugs don't bother it. It's the bees and humans. You know, it's this nice triangle. We eat the honey, but so you're feeding the bees your nectar from your plants, and it's so cool to go out in the morning because the bees will just be hanging there drunk on the lavender, you know. They just sit there all night.
And chill.
Yeah, and then as soon as the sun hits, they'll wake up and start to work. But and that's one of the things I love about lavender, is there's that symbiotic relationship with the plant, with what it gives you, because there's so many positive things. And I feel like lavender, as opposed to something like knapweed, it gets a long taproot, and it helps kind of open up the soil a little bit, but then you don't get any really nice benefits like healing your earaches, taking care of your burns. That was one of the first things the perfumers in France, there was a perfumer that got burned, and he stuck his hands down in a vat of lavender and pulled them out, and by the next morning he couldn't even tell that he had been burned. So it's really has this wonderful medicinal property that seems to be really geared towards humans. So I really feel like lavender is something that'll grow. I mean, I'm getting it. I'm not in Antarctica, but sometimes I feel like that because the sun doesn't hit me from Thanksgiving till the end of February, and but yet the lavender does well, and then it does well in Ecuador and Texas and Southern California. I haven't seen lavender groves in Arizona, but I'm sure some places. So it has such a wide range of climates it'll grow in too. So.
Do you sell straight oil? Straight lavender oil?
Yeah, at Meadowsweet Herbs I have the Montana blend lavender, and then I have a Bulgarian lavender and a French lavender there. So eventually, if my production increases, I'll be probably bottling it and labeling it and marketing it a little bit more. This was my biggest year, and I was really excited about 2 quarts of lavender oil to play with. So. And then next year my goal is to have more herbs to co-distill with. This was just an experiment and I was really pleased with it. So, any other questions or?
What varieties have you found work best in?
Well, Munstead and Hidecoat and Grosso and Imperial and Fulgate and Princess, and so I keep planting it. Some come back, some don't. The ones that don't work are Spanish lavender and the lighter colored lavenders, the whites and the light pinks. They just don't, for some reason. I've tried them and they might last a second year, but never a third.
You found planting it in the spring?
Yeah, for me. Yeah. I know in Coeur d'Alene I could plant anything in the fall and it'd be okay, but here in where I am, Missoula, I didn't plant lavender in Missoula when I lived here before, because I was here for almost 20 years. But
And you plant plants, not seeds.
Seeds with lavender, they don't. You don't know what you're getting because they cross-pollinate, and you get new varieties. And the other thing about them is the little teeny plants. Somebody told me that they never plant a first-year plant in the ground. They wait till the second year. So, and you usually do clippings and root it.
So that's how you propagate is clippings, and do you use root tone or some other?
Yeah, one of those, whatever the root stimulator is. And Melissa one time came out and did I was surprised. She did hydroponics with my lavender. And they actually did really well till they went to Iceland, and the person who was supposed to be watering forgot. And they didn't do so well then, but I was surprised that the hydroponics worked, because that's the other thing about lavender. They don't like wet feet. So you have to be real cautious not to overwater or plant in a really moist. They don't do well in swampland. That's one climate they don't like at all. They like sandy, loamy soil. So clay's been a challenge. I was told by quite a few growers around here, oh, don't worry about it. Just stick them in the ground. They don't need any amenities in the soil. They don't need any help. And that I found to be false for my soil, because I dig a hole and we get a bucket of rocks and a couple tablespoons of clay. So I really have to put some soil down in those holes.
So do you raise seedlings for 2 years? Before you
I buy most of mine from Paula, who has Paula's Gardens up in Paradise, Montana.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I do propagate a little bit, but it's such a pain in the butt. You have to mist them 3 or 4 times a day. And
that's what she does. So.
Yeah, and she loves doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to deprive her of it. Yeah.
Are there any native flowering plants in the area that would produce oils similar with therapeutic qualities?
Not a lot, not native.
Yarrow.
Yarrow is, but again, it's not prolific like lavender is. You get a little skiff of oil on the top. That's why I co-distill with my lavender, so I can get the properties of the yarrow and have an oil to work with.
It's had a lot of leaf though.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I've got it all over my hillside, but yeah, it's another one that's $800 to $1,000 an ounce.
Oh really? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever experimented with like arnica or calendula?
I've done flower essences with arnica, and I do arnica infused oils in olive oil, but it doesn't give you I've done a hydrosol. I don't get any oil
Pretty
at all.
hard to cultivate too.
Yeah, well, I have a lot on my property or next to it in the state lands and stuff, but yeah, arnica. Yeah, there aren't a lot of, now the sweetgrass, the gals up in, on the Crow Reservation, yeah, I'm not sure, they just have given me little bits of it. I've never seen their process. I think it's an alcohol extraction, and then you take the alcohol out and get the oil. But I'm not familiar with that type of extraction, so yeah.
Do you do cottonwood buds for the oil?
Only if you had a dedicated still to that, because it's so messy, but I infuse it in olive oil. Yeah, so. What else can I tell you about the lavender? It's just a wonderful thing to grow, and if you have some desires to do some growing, I'd love to chat with you about that and maybe becoming part of my Montana blend. I know there's a lot of people from a lot of different places, and so my goal is to get all the way across the state and get lavender from the whole state. So maybe by the time I'm 70, another 10 years.
How much does a little still like that cost?
This one, I think I paid around $250 for it. I just bought this one this summer for around $600. I think at the time that I bought this, it was about $500.
Did the little one come from Portugal as well?
You know, I think so, just because of the way it looks. I bought it off of Etsy from somebody. But yeah, it's a sweet little still, and you can get, if you're just doing 1 or 2 plants, you don't need a big one. You can get by with a little one, but I outgrew that one in about a season. You don't get a ton of oil off of that little guy.
Is rose a distillate as well?
You can steam distill. You can also CO2 distill. And that's a process I don't know a lot about, but I think it leaves a smell.
Distillation.
If you use a CO2 or a chemical distillation, yeah. You get a nose for it. Sometimes I'll bring my oils from all over the world because we travel quite a bit, and I've gotten lavender oil in Mexico City, I've gotten it in France, I've gotten it in Czech Republic, I've got, all over the place. And like Mexico City, that smelled to me like lavender soap, the Yardley. I don't know if you guys remember that. Yeah, when we were kids, our moms all had Yardley of. Yeah, and it had that chemically smell like that. And I don't know, maybe it's what they grow in Mexico, but it sure smelled like they either adulterated it or it wasn't even lavender oil. It could have been chemically derived. I don't know if you guys have ever made scents in a chemistry class. It's a fascinating process, and it's amazing how it can imitate the smell. We did vanilla in my chemistry class in college, and it sure smelled like lavender, like vanilla, but it wasn't. And I wouldn't have put it in my mouth because I knew what was in there. So that's another thing. You don't want to pay $5 for a bottle of essential oil. You don't. It doesn't matter what it is. You just don't want to pay $5 for a small bottle of essential oil. It's either not the essential oil and is a lot of filler, or it's chemically derived, because good quality essential oils, you can see what it took for us to do an ounce today. You know, either they're making it in a country where they're paying the people making it nothing, which does happen a lot with essential oils, or they're making it in a chemistry lab, or adding a lot of almond oil or whatever kind of oil. So that'll be my little shtick about paying for your oils. And you can go all to the extreme of really expensive oils. I consider doTERRA and Young Living and those kind of oils higher end. But if, like doTERRA, if you look at their practices, they're working with the farmers, they're building hospitals and schools and making sure the farmers get paid. So that's really important to me. You want to make sure there's testing getting done. If a company is not doing regular testing on their oils, you're not getting good quality oil. You can get a lot of, like I said, I had arsenic in my water in Coeur d'Alene. If I had distilled with that, there would be arsenic in my essential oil. So yeah, you have to know where you're getting it from.
Just thinking about planting lavender. If you plant lavender in the spring, plants, like when are you getting a harvest? Is that the next season?
The end of, the summer of the next year, you'll get small plants.
Okay.
And that's a second year plant. It's usually the 4th through the 6th years that you get your biggest crops.
4th through the 6th. And how much are you paying per plant? If you're
I started out paying $2. I pay $4 now per plant. And then that kind of got me, you know, when I buy 100 plants, that's $400. So that kind of got me into maybe doing a few more of my own plants.
So do you prune your plants, your lavender plants in the fall, for example? Do you prune?
You prune them as you cut the
Because
flowers off. Yeah.
You usually cut them either fresh or when they are dry in the plant.
Yeah, my personal plants I always cut fresh because I don't have. Marilyn, who had that is responsible for about half of my oil this year. Her plants, she had so many that she couldn't get to all of them. And sometimes they'll grow a second growth. It won't be as big as the first one.
Yeah.
So you'll get a few, ones that you.
Yeah, I have several lavender plants of different kinds in my garden. And
Yeah.
I really don't know what to do then when they're dry. Now I know.
Yeah, bring them to me and I'll make them into oil.
Do you actually retire your plants after 7 years? Replace them?
Generally mine will be winter killed as they get older,
As they get older,
as they fade out.
Nature takes care of it for you.
Yeah, but sometimes I'll plant, like one of the ways I propagate is I take a branch that's kind of gone off to the side and I'll put a rock on it. So it's in contact with the ground, it'll start getting roots.
Sweet.
And then I'll cut that off from the main plant and I'll have a new plant. So sometimes it does it on its own, but and that's one way to propagate, is to just plant it with a rock.
And would you do that in the fall?
Anytime.
Anytime.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes them a little while to really get roots, so it might take a couple seasons.
An inexpensive way to propagate.
Yeah, if you don't care. Like my labyrinth, I need to keep it clear, so sometimes I plant in sand. So I've put a layer of sand so the little baby plants will come out pretty easy, so I can replant them someplace else. And if I was in Missoula and my old garden here that was, pre-plowed by the glacier, I wouldn't even think about amenities, or I'd just stick it in the ground. But where I live, that's not even a possibility. Lots of rocks too to protect, and then I'm really thankful for a long snow season because it keeps the plants covered and they don't start to bud out too soon and get root damage from the freezing. So it's a interesting challenge though, growing lavender in Montana. It's fun. Oh yeah, well we have a lot of ponderosa, so the needles come down and I mound them around my plants.
So they like acidic soil?
I take them off. I just mound them for a little bit of insulation. And then on the plants that are in actual like cedar mulch, I mound those around the baby plants, like the 1 year or 2 years. Have 5 lavender plants I don't know what to do with. I'd love to have you harvest them and turn them into oil. So, and you can enjoy them through that's what has been nice about this season. I figured out that you can just let them stay on the plant till it dries out and then cut them and they still have almost as much oil as, and it smells just almost the same. So, yeah. Thank you.